Welcome. Good evening to everyone. My name is Tom Dunn. I am the Tufts Lawyers Association president. I practice law at Pierce Atwood. I'm a construction and commercial litigation attorney. Thank you for taking the time out today to join us, and happy first night of Hanukkah. So I graduated from Tufts 20 years ago. I'm a class of 2000. And normally about this time of the year, we get together as an association to celebrate the holidays and network and get to know each other. This year, we're doing it virtually, and we're honored to have Judge Salinger join us. I'll do an introduction to Judge Salinger later, but this is the first of a series of what TLA is going to be doing of a Tufts Judicial Series. We have quite a broad membership. At TLA, you're a member automatically if you went to Tufts and you went to law school. And part of that membership are judges. And we're going to feature judges on a periodic basis who went to Tufts, and really excited that Judge Salinger agreed to be the first in this series. Just a brief background on TLA. We are a nonprofit 501c3 organization. We were formed in 2003, and our mission is to help support the legal education, but also to create a network amongst TLA members, whether you practice law or not, but create a network and a community so that we can do events like this and have ways to interact and grow from each other. We have a national board that is spread around the country of practicing and non-practicing attorneys. And we also have regional groups in New England, New York, the West Coast, Washington, D.C., and recently Florida. So if any of you are located in those regions or in a different region and have an interest in creating a regional TLA committee, please reach out to us and we'll get you hooked up. I think Amy is putting in the chat room the names of people that lead up all those regional groups. This program today was planned by the New England group of TLA. So thank you for doing that. You can find the TLA on social media. Just search Tufts Lawyers on all the platforms. You'll see us. And we also have various committees. The newest one is our Social Justice Committee, which is planning an event on January 13th called Racial Disparities in the Legal Profession: Retaining, Advancing, and Developing Attorneys of Color. That program is a second part of a program that we did earlier this year in September with TLA former judge and one of Tufts professors, Sam Summers. So I'm looking forward to that event in January. Amy also put other information about Tufts in the chat room, including an opt-in directory, which could be good for referral sources, a mentor website called The Herd, and some other resources. So on to our program. I'm really excited for this. We are honored to have Judge Kenneth Salinger, and it's going to be a Q&A session led by Chris Vaccaro and Ann Stevenson. Chris is a commercial real estate partner at Dalton Feingold in Andover, Massachusetts. He represents developers and financial institutions in commercial real estate transactions and litigation. He's a graduate from Tufts in 1981. And his wife, Kathleen Smith Vaccaro, is a fellow jumbo who graduated with Judge Salinger in 1983. Ann Stevenson is a 2007 grad from Tufts. She's a court-appointed bar advocate on the Children and Families Panel and Mental Health Panel. In that role, Ann has regularly, it seems like every single day I talk to her in planning this, appearing in court for proceedings throughout the pandemic, representing those that need the most help. She also maintains her own private law practice, and she's based out of Salem, Massachusetts. Judge Salinger is an associate justice of the Massachusetts Superior Court. He graduated in 1983 from Tufts. He was an economics major, although he told me that he took enough moral philosophy courses that some of his professors thought he was a philosophy major. He lived in Haskell and Metcalf his first 2 years. After Tufts, Judge Salinger worked for 8 years at the State House with the Ways and Means Committee on fiscal policy and public finance. He graduated from Harvard Law School in 1990 and joined Palmer and Dodge. At Palmer and Dodge, he was part of or led the telecommunications practice and was part of the firm's executive committee. In 2006, he rejoined public service at the Attorney General's office as an assistant attorney general and appeals coordinator. And in 2012, as I'm sure most of you know, he was confirmed as an associate justice in the Massachusetts Superior Court. He presently sits as one of the 4 judges on the business litigation session, a specialty calendar for complex and commercial business disputes. He sits there for the first 6 months of the year and then typically rotates to a criminal session the balance of the year. Currently, he's in Middlesex Superior Court in a criminal session. Please help me welcome Chris, Ann, and Judge Salinger. Thank you very much, and take it away.
All right, so I think I was gonna, all right, so I think I was gonna ask you a few questions, Judge Salinger, if you don't mind.
Sounds good.
So, you know, a lot of my questions are just going to be geared towards finding out what your history with Tufts is. It's not a cross-examination.
We shall see.
Wouldn't you say? And then kind of go into like, what is it like to be in court right now during the pandemic, and what kind of things are going on today in the social justice world? Because that's my area of interest.
All right.
So I'm wondering, where are you from and why did you pick Tufts for your undergrad?
So I grew up in Marlborough, Massachusetts. We moved up to Massachusetts when I was like 8.5. Before that, I was in Maryland in Silver Spring. Why did I end up at Tufts? I don't know. I resisted it because my oldest sister went to Tufts and I did not want to go to school where she did, but I ended up following her anyway and was happy I did. That worked well for me.
What did you end up majoring and why did you pick that major?
I was really interested in sort of public policy issues. Plus I'd taken this really interesting economics course in high school. And so I started dabbling in economics and that's where I ended up majoring. As Tom said, I read a lot of moral philosophy, especially with Hugo Bedeau and some other things, but an econ major.
Yeah. Were there any experiences that you had as an undergrad at Tufts that you think back on in your law career now and you're like, that had an impact on me, or that was a special experience that kind of formed my life in a certain way?
So I think a combination of being exposed to the kinds of things that, you know, folks were trying to teach me and Gary Merkin, who's on here, and others in the econ department, plus the proximity of Tufts to Boston worked out well for me because at the end, the summer after my freshman year, I ended up working for the Massachusetts Senate Ways and Means Committee. And since I was so close, I convinced them to give me a part-time job. I worked there throughout the rest of my undergrad years, you know, taking the 96 bus into the Red Line downtown. And it was that experience at the State House that turned me from somebody who said, law school sounds really boring, to deciding law school is what I wanted to do.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, you know, right now I'm in a position where my own son is applying to colleges and we're having this debate about, does your major matter? Is it your love of the, whatever it is you're studying that brings you success, or is it like, should you be planning to, you know, and so, you know, it's kind of comforting to hear you say that you did economics, but you're, you know, it helped you form where you are today in a different way, in a more roundabout way. So
Yeah, I mean, I think we all either have or had classmates at Tufts who seemed surprisingly directed, and they knew what they were wanting to do after
Yeah.
school, and they were doing everything they needed to do to get there. I was not one of those people.
yeah. So when was it that you decided that you really wanted to go to law school?
So I was then working full-time at the State House. It was probably 2 or 3 years into that. I was having a wonderful time as somebody right out of college, getting to work on public policy, develop some interesting programs, write things into law. And then some of the things I worked on started to get challenged in court. I realized there are actually lawyers whose job it was at the Attorney General's office to do things like defend the constitutionality of statutes when they get challenged in court. That sounded really interesting. Didn't sound like anything I knew about what lawyers did. I knew very little about what lawyers did. And I started to think that, well, whatever I might end up doing with a law degree, I didn't think anymore that the 3 years at law school would feel like a waste of time. So I decided to apply and see what happened.
Yeah. Okay. After so then you leave law school and you were with, what kind of work did you do?
So again, the public policy interest is probably why I ended up at the, may it rest in peace, law firm of Palmer and Dodge. They had a lot of public sector clients, big public finance department, but also their litigation department, which is where I landed. Did a lot of work for public authorities, for municipalities, for big colleges and universities, other nonprofits, in addition to a sort of more traditional roster of, corporate and insurance company kind of clients. And so, again, not a huge planner. I thought, well, I could land here for a couple of years, see how it goes, and then decide what I want to do next. And after 15 and a half, almost 16 years, I finally decided what I wanted to do next. But in the meantime, I enjoyed my work at Palmer and Dodge.
Excellent. So then eventually at some point, there comes a time where the opportunity arises to take a seat on the bench. Can you tell me how that opportunity came about for you? Was it something that you thought about ahead of time, or did somebody bring it to you? And how was that process for you?
Oh, I was definitely not somebody who was recruited. Nobody brought it to me. Massachusetts, as probably most everybody on this meeting knows, does not elect its judges. So I was lucky in that way. If I lived in a state where state judges had to run for election, there's no way I would be on the bench. Massachusetts, you can apply, and a body called the Judicial Nominating Commission sifts through all the applications and does a whole lot of interviewing and due diligence. And if they think maybe you'd make a good judge, they recommend your name to the governor. And then if the governor decides to nominate you, you have to get confirmed by an elected group called the Governor's Council. Now, some people in Massachusetts, they think they want to be a judge and they apply, and the Judicial Nominating Commission says, well, that's great. And they send up their name, and the governor said, yes, that's the person I want to nominate. And the next thing you know, they're a judge. That was not me. I was one of those people who had to apply over and over and over. First time, far earlier, didn't go anywhere. After that, after Deval Patrick became governor, his Judicial Nominating Commission loved me. They would bring me in. First, they recommended that I be appointed to the appeals court, and nothing happened with that. And then they recommended a little while later, a few years later, that I get appointed to the Superior Court, and nothing came of that. And then they recommended that I get appointed to the appeals court. And so, of course, Governor Patrick said, okay, we'll put him on the Superior Court finally. And that was a wonderful thing for me. And so that's what I've been doing for the past 8 years.
All right. So tell me, what do you have any advice for any undergrads that are here right now that are thinking about going to law school, and the kinds of things they might want to think about that were important to you when you were making these decisions?
Sure. So if you're thinking about it, just make sure you're thinking you're going to law school for some good, positive reason. I think everybody who has gone to law school had some classmates who went to law school because, they couldn't decide what else they were going to do. And it seemed like a safe thing to do. And what the heck? And many of those people ended up hating law school. But the people who go because, legal issues seem really interesting and that's something they want to sink their teeth into, those are the folks who get a whole lot out of law school and love it. So go with the right attitude and with a desire to suck intellectually everything you can out of law school, and you'll have a great time.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's fantastic advice, because I think a lot of people would have said to me in the beginning, because I was a mom and I was, when I went to law school. But I think what does carry the best lawyers is if you're very passionate about what you do. There's always a job for somebody who you make your niche no matter where you are. But if you're passionate about it, it really helps. So
Absolutely.
I would just say, if you're passionate about helping people and through the courts, do it. Don't listen to anybody, just do it.
Hey, and there was one question that came through from an undergrad that fits in with what you're talking about now. Do you mind if I jump in?
Yeah, go for it.
So Judge Salinger, the student said that recently they had the opportunity to meet with some other judges in a program that they were doing, and the judges talked about big breaks, things that happened in their career, either mentors or opportunities that they seized upon that got them where they were. And he was wondering if you had anything along those lines in your career path, or on the opposite side, have you given opportunities from a mentorship aspect to others, to give opportunities, to yourself or to other people as far as career paths?
Oh, absolutely. Those kinds of big breaks, often, completely serendipitous, unplanned, make a huge difference in anybody's success in life, in the world. So, one thing that leaps to mind, I was sort of a senior associate at my law firm, trying to prove to the partners that I could contribute economically to the firm, because apparently they've decided I was a good enough lawyer to keep around. So, the other thing, what can I bring that is worthwhile to them money-wise? And right around that time, one of the more senior partners who was starting to develop a pretty significant book of business, doing regulatory work for AT&T, that I was doing, a goodly chunk of that work for him. He got appointed managing partner in the firm, didn't have time to run that work anymore, and needed me to take it over. So completely serendipitous, that stood me in good stead in my law firm for a long time. Other thing that comes to mind, it wasn't coincidence. I ended up working after private practice at the Attorney General's office. Remember, I said one thing that made me think to go to law school was realizing there were these lawyers who could go to court and defend the constitutionality of statutes. Well, that part of the Attorney General's office, one day I called up somebody I knew who worked there and said, geez, would you be willing to have lunch and talk to me about, what your job is really like? And he said, wait, are you thinking you might want to work here? I said, well, maybe, I don't know. And he said, well, we almost never have openings here. We have one now. When I hang up, I'm going to go down the hall, tell my boss not to fill the job until he talks to you. So that was kind of serendipitous, I guess. Yes, all of us who've been practicing law for a while do our best to give opportunities to newer up and coming lawyers, so they can learn and they can grow and they can prove themselves.
All right. So my next question has to do with COVID. Obviously, the courts have changed since COVID came about. I've only been a lawyer for 3 years, but I've been in court. I've been in almost all the courts. I'm usually in juvenile court or district court, but I'm often in superior court. I've gone to the appeals court, and some of my cases have gone up. But they all have different practices. And I think one of the things that was really shocking to me was that the COVID thing happened so fast, and people really don't understand what it's like to go to court in December 2020 during the pandemic. Can you tell us what it looks like in your courtroom and what it's like to interact with the people in these cases that you're sitting on?
Yeah, and you're certainly right. It was very fast. I mean, for the courts like everywhere else, but the Massachusetts court system sort of shut down to physical interactions with people. I believe it was March 13th. And at that point, most people in the trial court of Massachusetts had never heard of Zoom. Very few people had ever done video conferencing. And some of us started saying, hey, we need to make this happen because we need some way to do business. And so like most of you, I'm sure, that's what my daily life is like now in the courts. It's a little strange. Typically, I'm at the court rather than at home, but I go to the courthouse. I go into my lobby, my office. I turn on the computer, and if I'm not, writing a decision or preparing for some sort of hearing the way I used to, the hearings are all by video. My conferences, my interaction with lawyers, with parties, are all through the video screen, and I like that very much because I want to protect the staff and not have them interact face-to-face with people who, without knowing it, might be carrying the coronavirus. There are a lot of downsides. There are a lot of upsides to that as well. Right now, it's working pretty darn well, except one thing I don't think we could possibly do on Zoom, and we're not trying to, and we're not doing at all, is jury trials. Although most civil and criminal cases resolve without a trial, quite often they resolve because the parties know if they don't resolve it, they're going to go to trial. Right now, everybody knows, this case isn't going to trial. There are no jury trials. And that's
and I want
big
people
problem.
to understand really what that means because we haven't really fleshed that out. You might see something in the Globe covering a piece of it, but to me, it's an everyday reality because I have, I do some criminal cases and I do some delinquency cases. But what that really means is that you have people right now who are awaiting trial who have not been convicted and they're not eligible to get bail. So they're just sitting in jail waiting for a trial. And because they can't have the jury trials, they just have to indefinitely wait until we can. Alternatively, they're under an incredible amount of pressure to accept pleas because of the COVID situation. First of all, they don't know if the amount of time that they're going to wait for a trial is going to outweigh whatever they would have been sentenced to. Because they're like, look, you can take this conviction and you'll be out in 2 months or 3 months, or you can wait for a trial, but the trial won't happen until the earliest of like next summer, maybe. We've been told unofficially that it would be at the earliest next summer, but probably next fall. And meanwhile, you have a COVID situation in jail. Nobody can get out really if they're not able to make bail. And every day there's new people arrested. So there's more people coming in and more people coming in. And I don't know how we're gonna resolve that. But I just wanted to make it clear that that's a really important thing that we need to keep in our sights when we talk about these trials.
It's a huge problem. I think with the leadership of our Supreme Judicial Court, the courts, other players in the criminal justice system, this spring made it possible for people who otherwise would have been held in jail awaiting trial to get out. But there are a growing number, as Ann says, of people who are being held because, for example, some judge found under a Massachusetts state law that the government, the Commonwealth, had shown this person poses a real danger and they can't be let out even though they're presumed to be innocent. Or because of something in this particular person's past, the judge is really concerned that if they can't post a whole lot of bail, they might not show up again and they're not being released. They can't post the bail and people have been sitting for some people, a year or more waiting for trials that should have already happened. And we don't know when we're going to be able to make them happen.
Yeah, I mean, some of the due process issues that come up as a lawyer are that the Massachusetts bar says that we no longer have to meet with our clients face to face. So but we can't always access our clients. So say right now there's an outbreak at Middleton jail. If you've got a client in Middleton, you're really not, I don't even think we're allowed in there. And some of the jails do have teleconferencing technology and some of them don't. So it's hard to meet with your clients that way. You get into phone calls, all the phone calls are recorded. and they're costly too. Like as an attorney, you have to have an account set up to accept calls from prisoners. It costs us. But these are all due process issues. But not only that, the way that we hold these hearings has also significantly changed. Like, so when I'm in court with you, or not with you, but like with my client and the judge, it's often my client. I prefer to be with them, but that's not always a safe thing. It's not an option if they're in prison or jail. Sometimes I might go to a hospital, but if you can social distance, you do, but it's a right to counsel issue if your client isn't right next to you, because half of having effective assistance of counsel is being able to communicate in real time privately with your client throughout a hearing. And we no longer have that anymore. I mean, if we're going to effectively social distance, because we're not really going to courtrooms anymore. What kind of things has the Superior Court done to address social distancing, as far as like, how often do you go into the regular court in hearings with actual litigants and defendants?
As little as possible. And since I've been back in the criminal side of things since the beginning of July, really, I've only done it when somebody has been seized on an arrest warrant. They're there in the courthouse in custody. They need to get dealt with. Everything else we've been doing by videos. That's true if a criminal defendant is being held at the jail. The jails are pretty happy to accommodate video connections to the court because it's easier for them. It's safer for them to do that rather than transport somebody who's in custody to the courthouse, be worried that person gets exposed to the coronavirus and then brings it into the jail. So they like that. It's got conveniences for others as well. I have a lot of matters involving people who are on probation. They've been convicted of a crime or pleaded guilty to a crime, and maybe they served some time in prison, maybe they didn't, but now they're being supervised by a probation officer. They need to appear before a judge for some reason. Almost every probationer either has or can borrow somebody's smartphone and do a video conference, even if they've never done it before. And then they don't need to make their way to the courthouse and sit and wait in the court. I'm remembering a probationer a little while back. This was clearly the first time he'd ever used anything like Zoom, and he got coached how to link in. And then once he was on, I was coaching him on how to do things. At the end, once he was happy enough with what I told him I was going to do, he was much calmer. I complimented him on his successfully completing his first ever video conference. And very sincerely and earnestly, he said, "Judge, this technology is amazing." So it's got advantages as well as disadvantages.
What do you think, in your opinion, is the difference between a good lawyer and a great lawyer who comes before you? What are your...
So a few things come to mind. Great and interesting question. One, playing back to something Ann you said earlier, passion. Good lawyers are passionate. Great lawyers are passionate. Good lawyers, know their stuff. Great lawyers know their stuff inside and out, and they're dogged. But also, I generally deal with people who are litigators as opposed to doing commercial law work or other kinds of law work. I think it's true in other areas as well. But great lawyers are incredibly good communicators. They not only think about what they want to say, but they think about how to convey what they need to convey in a way that is convincing or accessible. It's true whether they're negotiating on behalf of a client or appearing before a judge or a jury. Doing it in a way that is both accessible to their audience and convincing is an important part of being a great lawyer.
So, Judge, it's Tom Dunn again. I have one question, then I want to transfer over to Chris Vaccaro to ask you some questions. I think I know this is going to be a non-answer, but somebody asked, is there any college or law school that is like the preferred law school that Massachusetts judges get recruited from, or it looks really good for the nominating committee? Do you have any sense of that?
My sense is that if you look at all of the judges who serve in Massachusetts, including, ones who've been nominated by our current governor, Governor Baker, you'll see pretty much every imaginable law school, primarily from the Northeast, not solely, but no, I don't think there is one or more law schools. You might think, oh, this is Massachusetts, right? It's got to be Boston College Law School, but I think it's most everything.
Great. Thank you, Ann, and Chris, take it away.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks, Ann. Those are great questions. And it's great to hear the judge's perspective on some of the issues involving criminal cases. I'm going to segue into more of the civil side, which is what I'm more familiar with in my practice. And while doing so, I'd like to encourage the audience here to offer their questions as well, because it's not every day that you actually get to ask a judge questions. More often than not, the judge is asking you a question. So please take advantage of this opportunity. Judge Salinger, what I'd like to talk a little bit about is the business litigation session. Tom had mentioned before that you have been sitting on that for a few years, doing 6 months a year on that. What is the business litigation session of the Superior Court?
So the business litigation session was, created just a little over 20 years ago. The idea is there are certain kinds of disputes that concern corporate or partnership or other business matters that are complicated enough that they can benefit from some extra attention of the judge. In my view, although I don't think the session's ever been explicitly publicly justified this way, there's another good reason to have a business litigation session, and that's the kinds of issues that need to be resolved there, the kinds of motions, for example, that judges in that session have to decide. They're time consuming. And so if a judge is in a regular civil session and hears a BLS kind of motion, it might take a week or more to write up that decision. In that period of time, the judge might be able to resolve 15 or 20 other cases. And so guess what? Feels good to get 15 or 20 cases resolved, and then that one doesn't get reached. So another benefit of a session that sort of focuses on more complex lawsuits is because the caseload is smaller. We've got about, at this point, 200 cases assigned to each of the 2 business litigation sessions compared to 6 or 7 or 800 in a typical Superior Court civil session. It's easier for the judges in those sessions to spend more time on any particular matter.
So it sounds like this initiative helps to, it enhances judicial efficiency.
And it enhances the ability of lawyers like Russell Beck to tell their client, we're going to be able to take care of you. We've got a place we can bring your lawsuit.
Excellent. Are there any special qualifications or expertise that are really needed to be a judge on the BLS?
I think the primary requirement is refusal to say no if the Chief Justice asks you to do it. For some reason, most of my colleagues, when we're talking about where we're going to sit, they say, you're in the BLS. Thank goodness I don't have to do that. I can't imagine doing that. There are trade-offs of everything, right? There are all kinds of cases that I was happy to handle when I was sitting in other civil sessions that I don't necessarily miss because I'm in the BLS. I think an important qualification, though, to more seriously answer your question, you've got to be somebody who enjoys writing. There's all different kinds of work on the Superior Court, all different kinds of work for other trial judges in Massachusetts. Not all of it involves writing substantial, lengthy decisions. You have to like doing that because at the BLS, that's a big part of our session's work.
Judge, how are cases assigned to the business litigation session?
People either ask to be there or occasionally they get transferred in kicking and screaming by a judge. There's categories of cases that qualify. There are venue requirements for those of you who have not gone to law school. What that basically means is there are certain parts of the state where a lawsuit can be brought depending on where the parties are located. The BLS is in Boston in Suffolk County. Not every case can properly be brought in Suffolk County. So sometimes those cases end up in the BLS anyway because neither side objects. Sometimes they can't because one side says, no, we'd rather not be in Boston. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now, when it comes to needing an ex parte decision, and for those who are not in law school yet, that those are decisions where a plaintiff will go to the judge and get the judge to rule on a temporary basis, whether it's an injunction or some kind of a attachment or an attachment on a bank account. Is it efficient for plaintiffs to go to the business litigation session to get that kind of relief?
Ex parte relief is pretty hard to get. Part of the training for new Superior Court judges, there's formal and informal training. And it was true when I became a new judge. I think it remains true that there are two words of wisdom, bits of advice that all newer Superior Court judges hear over and over and over from their colleagues. First, always go to the bathroom before you go out on the bench or before you start your Zoom hearing. And second, you really shouldn't grant something on an ex parte basis, because one side comes into court and tells you one story. There's always another story. Better to say, look, this sounds like a real emergency. Let me hear from both sides the day after tomorrow. But it's very unusual for a judge to be willing to act just on the say-so of one side without giving the other side a chance to be heard.
Thank you. Does case management differ in the business litigation session than in the regular general Superior Court that we all know?
It does. There are sort of general guidelines in the Superior Court for how quickly cases are supposed to move from one stage to the next. In the BLS, rather than just follow those kinds of standards, we always bring the parties in. Now we do it by Zoom generally, to have a discussion about what's the right schedule for this case. We want to move things along quickly so that the case can be resolved sooner rather than later, while recognizing that in these cases, sometimes the lawyers may reasonably need a fairly long time to get information from the other side or from other parties. So there's always an individual case schedule in our session. And because we have a smaller caseload, it's also, I think, a bit easier for lawyers to have a conference, not one-on-one, but with everybody present when there are case management issues down the line.
Thanks.
Chris, there's a question from the audience, if you want me to jump in.
Please.
So it's a bit of a curveball, Judge. Given the present state of the U.S. president's lawsuits over election fraud, and what we've gone through the election, do you have any sense of if that has an impact or is going to have an impact on judicial independence, or do you have any thoughts along those lines, reflecting what's going on presently with the federal government and the election process?
I guess I've got one observation I feel comfortable sharing, which is it's really struck me, like I think it's struck so many people, as there have been more and more decisions on these lawsuits. It seems to me judges have been making a point of being clearer and more direct in explaining what they're doing and why, and if they have concerns about the suits, articulating them. Some of the initial decisions were couched in more judicial ease about, failures of proof, and whether it's the recent Third Circuit decisions, some of the recent federal district court decisions, it does strike me that the judges addressing these are, I think, making a point of speaking in a manner that they hope will allow their message to be heard, not just by the parties, but by the public, because obviously they know the public is paying close attention.
Yeah, I'm just glad that with the situation we're seeing in 2020, it's a lot clearer who won than back in 2000. It's clear that where the numbers are, and Biden was elected, in my opinion, which I think a lot of us share. And this seems to be a lot of thrashing around, but I wanted to sort of get back to a few more questions I just had in the business litigation session, if I may, and that is, are there any initiatives underway that you're aware of, Judge, where this might be expanding beyond Suffolk County?
Before the pandemic shut things down, the current BLS judges were working with members of the bar to explore sort of going on the road, talking to lawyers in other parts of the state about the BLS. They might not be familiar with it, try to get folks more comfortable with the idea of allowing their cases to be heard in the existing business litigation sessions. Notwithstanding recent Mass Lawyers Weekly editorial, I think it would be unlikely if there would be a business litigation session established in another county. I think the belief is there's enough other work that needs to be done throughout the state that having 2 Superior Court BLS sessions is probably the most that makes sense.
Would it be okay if
Please, go ahead.
if you had a follow-up, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, please.
Okay, so my question has to do, I see some of the undergrads on here, they might not know how the courts are organized in Massachusetts. So you have the district court, and then where you are in Superior Court, which is like the next leg up on the food chain where there are major crimes and bigger trials with controversies over, but there is a big difference, a noticeable difference in the attorneys and that we see coming through the district court as opposed to the Superior Court. Like every time I go to Superior Court, I'm always surprised to see, and maybe, I mean, this is just me going to like Salem, Suffolk, I've been to Worcester a few times, but it seems like there are fewer women and fewer people of color practicing in Superior Court. And I'm wondering, what do you think we could do to recruit more attorneys from more diverse backgrounds into to practice in the higher courts?
So I want to touch on various parts of what you just raised. First, talking about the court structure in Massachusetts. For those of you not familiar with it, Massachusetts is different than some other places because in addition to those 2 levels of general trial courts, we also have a number of specialized trial courts. We have a juvenile court where criminal and non-criminal matters involving juveniles, those all get heard there. I never have to touch those. We have a probate and family court, whether it's child custody, divorce matters, or probate matters involving the estate of somebody who's died. Specialized court deals with that. I don't need to learn any of that law. I have a chance once in a while to interact with judges and lawyers from other places. So for example, for quite a few years now, once a year, I've been 1 week visiting faculty at a trial advocacy workshop that my law school, Harvard Law School, runs. There's a big historic connection between that program and the District of Columbia. So there's always lawyers and judges, current and former, from DC. Their court's very different. They have a very excellent trial court, but they do everything. And so the judge who's in a criminal session for 6 or 12 months then might rotate to a juvenile session or a probate session. I don't need to deal with that. Another huge difference of Massachusetts compared to other states, talking to judges from elsewhere, we don't have the death penalty. I don't need to preside over death penalty cases, which is a huge difference. And your observation that the Superior Court, you'll look around, back when you could look around the courtroom to see who was there, doesn't always look like Massachusetts is exactly right. It's true of the lawyers. It's very true of the judges. We have right now very few Superior Court judges who anybody would describe as being people of color or from a minority or ethnic background. And that's on the governor, that's on governors, that's where that needs to change. And in terms of encouraging more diverse people of more diverse backgrounds, I don't have a clue from where I sit on how to do that. I certainly hope over time, I think the Massachusetts bar in general looks much more diverse than it did when I first started practicing law. But you're certainly right that the mix of folks, the mix of backgrounds you see in your typical district court session feels very different from a lot of Superior Court sessions. And I'll tell you, the business litigation session looks and feels very different than most criminal sessions in the Superior Court.
Yeah, no, I'm always impressed when I go to Superior Court because the judges are always nice to me because, and I didn't figure it out, but it was just that thing that there just weren't a lot of women, and so they didn't want to scare me off, so that I would continue to come back.
And it's nice we've gotten to the point that if it's unusual for female lawyers to appear, that means they're treated better, as opposed to back in the day, whenever that was, when they were not treated better. They were treated much, much worse.
No, and I think there are things that we as the TLA can do to help encourage our colleagues and the up and coming lawyers to aim for that next level and to support them on the way up the food chain.
Absolutely.
And we are totally open to letting anybody in the comments or
Yeah, and
contact us after if you want to share ideas about that.
Thank you, Ann. And so just two final questions from the attendees, and then we'll go into our breakout rooms. So Judge Salinger, you have to remember both questions here.
All right.
The first one is, given the backlog of cases that's just probably gotten worse given COVID this year, what can trial attorneys, litigators do in conjunction with the court to alleviate that backlog of cases, is question number one. And question number two, if somebody's a law student and or a new lawyer, and they have as their career goal to become a judge, what are some things, a couple of things they could do to help that come to fruition?
Great questions. So starting with the first one, what can practicing lawyers do to help move things along, help the courts reduce the growing backlog of cases? I think there are a few things. First of all, whether it's a civil matter or a criminal matter, there are important things that often decide what's going to happen with the case that don't involve the final trial. Motions to dismiss on the criminal side, a motion to suppress evidence on the civil side, a motion for summary judgment. And it seems that with the delay in trial dates, there's been less of an urgency for not all, but for some trial lawyers to push those things forward. One of the best things, no matter who you represent, if you're in court, you want to move things forward, is make those things happen, get those decisions teed up in front of a judge, they can be resolved, and that might lead to the case being resolved in total. The other thing that lawyers can do is be open, at least in the right cases, to the possibility of, if a case needs to go to trial, doing it without a jury. I'm about to go back to the BLS. I don't know when we're going to be able to do jury trials, but people who have cases ready for trial that agree to do without a jury, we can make those happen pretty darn fast. It's true on the criminal side as well. There are not as many jury-waived trials on the criminal side, although I've done quite a few as a judge, cases that involve particularly emotional, troubling facts. Sometimes defendants, their lawyers decide, maybe we don't want this emotional matter in front of a jury. Those cases can be teed up for trial without waiting for jury trials to restart. So put the word out. Those are two good things that lawyers can be doing to move things forward. I think I do remember the other question. If you're a law student or a new lawyer and you think one day you might want to be a judge, what should you do? The best advice I can give is twofold. First, develop your skills in general, prove that you're an excellent lawyer. That's probably not surprising, but also think about what kind of experiences you want to have. If you want to be, and think about what kind of judge you might want to be someday. It's very different to try to be an appellate judge versus trying to be, like I am, a trial judge in the trial court. If you're wanting to be a trial judge, you need to find a way to get trial experience. And that might involve the job that you have. You might want to spend some time in the criminal courts as a defense lawyer or a prosecutor. You might want to do some of the kinds of work that Ann's been doing, or legal services work. That's also work where, let's say you're working for a law firm. Think about pro bono opportunities. Even, it can be hard in law firms for newer lawyers to get in court, and if they do, sometimes can be hard for them to be taking leading roles. But a lot of firms are happy to encourage and support more junior lawyers taking things on on a pro bono basis that might be more likely to get you into court. So look for those opportunities and make them happen.
Great. Well, thank you, Judge Salinger, so much for joining us today. It's been a pleasure getting to know you better. So everyone, round of applause for Judge Salinger.
You're very kind. It was my pleasure to join you all.
Thank you.